Very much. And welcome to the exciting conclusion of a girl with a portrait of a girl of a Capri Girl by John Singer Sargent. We're going to finish up what we started last week, and I'm going to show you some working methods that I have for sort of a longer term project. I did a little work between last week and today, so I've got some of that laid out to show you as well. But before we get into that, I of course always want to go over the supplies. So let's take a look. And you know, as I've said, if you're new to this format and this is your first Michael's class, welcome. But don't panic about not having exactly what's on the list. Frankly, I'm not using ultramarine blue or cadmium red or cadmium yellow. The important thing is to have your three primary colors, some white and some black. Black's not even on the list. And then have a suitable array of brushes, which I've sort of posted here. All of these supplies here you can get at Michael's stores or at pretty much any art supply store. These are some really economical options that I have taken a photograph of here. So if you need that list, you can always go back to the recording and just sort of take a screenshot of what I've got posted right now. And that will give you a very good starting point to work from. Let's see if there's anything else here. The brushes that I'm mainly using, I'll show you when we get started, but they're basically a mix between flats, rounds, and filberts of different sizes. Filberts being sort of the in-between brush. They're kind of flats, they're kind of rounds, but they have in many cases the best qualities of each. So that is a brief introduction to the supplies. We are working, of course, in oils on this project, and for the next project which will start, I'll get into that later, but it will also be sort of a more extended one, so you'll have some extra time to work on it. Okay. So this is the portrait we are copying. This is a portrait of a Capri Girl by John Singer Sargent, one of the great portraiturists really of all time. And I don't think I'm making much of a stretch with that. It's not a terribly controversial claim. He was an American painter of the late 1800s, mid to late 1800s, I believe in early 20th century. Practiced mainly in Europe, London and Paris, and was, you know, sort of one of the preeminent portraiturists of his era. And he's also done a lot of sort of plein air landscape and cityscapes and things like that. So if you're not familiar with him, John Singer Sargent is his name, and he's a pretty amazing artist. Very, very skilled draftsman. Okay. So with this, what I did last week is I sort of had everybody kind of divide things up into simple shapes. The first, the big block head on the left there, and then just sort of a series of triangles to take up the torso and the blouse, and the shoulder, you know, sort of the upper torso and the shoulders and things like that. And then on one on the right, I broke up the head into what I like to call the sort of the planes of the face. The face is not a perfectly round object. It's much more square and geometrical. And so we talked about this. This is all in the video from last week, which is archived on the Michael's YouTube channel. So be sure to check that out if you're joining this one for the first time. Okay, so let's have a look at where we are. Okay, so this is three different stages of what we did last week. The one on the far left is where I ended. When I was done, that's pretty much as far as I had gotten, and I told you that I would probably fiddle with it, and I did fiddle with it. And I'll sort of walk you through this a little bit to give you some idea of my thought process and what I was working on. And as always, if you've got questions, feel free to put them in the chat, and then those will be read out to me, and we can sort of discuss things as we go. I don't have a problem with that at all. I actually encourage it. Okay, so the one on the far left is where we started. This was done almost exclusively in raw umber. I think at the very end, I added a little bit of blue to the umber to make it even darker, but it was pretty much just in monochrome. And then the middle one is me sort of working back mainly around the mouth. I felt like the mouth needed to go up a little bit and get closer to the nose. So what I did is I mixed some white with yellow ochre, because that's the base coat that I used before I started painting at all. So that's sort of our white of the canvas, so to speak, but it's actually sort of a yellowish white. So I would use a lot of the white, especially around the mouth in this middle stage here, and just did some kind of back and forth to try and position it a little bit better. And I also did a little bit of carving of the face a little bit more, a little darker along that the left side of her as we're looking at her. And what else did I do? I did a little bit around the neck as well to kind of push the neck a little bit further in, sort of more underneath the nose. I felt that it lined it up with the nose fairly evenly, and that's kind of what I did there. And then as I worked over to the right, the last one here on the right, as I started fiddling with the eye, I felt the eye needed to go down and they needed to get a little bit more even with each other. They're sort of slanted a little bit and a little bit far apart. And so there was a few things that needed adjusting in the eyes. And I also put a lot of sort of heavy white above the eyebrows to kind of do some repair work there. So, at this stage, just because you put a mark down and just because it's a dark mark, this is a point that I really want to emphasize here. You do not have to live with it. It's not there forever. With oils, oils are very opaque and you can paint very, heavily. And so I came in with some heavier passages just to kind of rework and redesign the face. That portrait, it's a little bit harder when you're actually drawing from life, from a live person there, because they move and their features change a little bit. Sometimes you get a little more tense or a little more relaxed. But with something like this, a master copy, that's not going anywhere. It's not changing. So this is a really good one to sort of practice your ability to see things well and clearly. So I really tried to take advantage of that. And then the final version this is where we are now. This is what I've got in the overhead scene. I feel like I've made the eyes more compatible and symmetrical. Like one of them looked a little higher and one looked a little lower, which was very disconcerting. And you're looking at a person and, it feels like one eye is higher than the other. And so, and also having, the finished portrait right here and going, yes, this is clearly not right. This is not perfect. But it's close. And I think that one of the main differences is I didn't quite get the tilt of the head right. This is more of an upright viewpoint, and mine is more, her head is sort of cocked a little bit. And that's bothering me, but it's not bothering me the way it was with the anatomical stuff that I didn't feel like I was quite seeing in the initial stages. So from here to here, I feel like we're in fairly good shape. So I'm just going to have to live with it. If this were, my painting and I really wanted to get this right, I would probably do a little bit more of these refinements that I mentioned here. But we're going to go with it. Okay. So with that in mind, here we have the painting at its current stage, and it's still pretty much uniformly sort of yellow undercoat and then sort of this brown umber overpainting. And you can't see it quite as well. Let me just get a little bit closer in here. But there is a little bit of kind of a disjointed aspect to things here. There's these little hot spots of white, which is not a bad idea. I mean, you're eventually going to get there. But what I like to do when I'm sort of starting out fresh in a new day of painting is I like to get everything even, more unified. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to start by using my medium. I didn't mention the medium in the supplies. It's actually in the list, but I didn't say it out loud. But this is my sort of go-to mix of 1/2 linseed oil and 1/2 Winsor & Newton Liquin. You can use, this is just straight Liquin right here. You could use Liquin straight out of the tube. I like to mix it. It gives me a longer working time. I've mentioned this a few times, but on something like today where I'm going to get it done in an hour, your straight Liquin, that was really tight. Your straight Liquin would probably be more than sufficient for getting that, getting the medium into the consistency you want. I also have, I've abandoned my paper towels for today, and I just got an old t-shirt, and this is actually what I prefer to use. It doesn't have to be red, and frankly it shouldn't be red, but it doesn't really matter as long as it's cotton. That's what I'm going to be using for my cleanup, or not my cleanup. Yeah, I guess it is my cleanup. We'll see how clean I get. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of warm things up. And I'm going to get kind of a flat sable brush or a synthetic sable brush. These are finer. They tend to make more of an even coat rather than a rougher coat, which the bristle brushes tend to have that more of a rough feel to them. And you can see here that I've made some marks. I've made some blue marks. I made some blue marks down. I can't see that. Let me just widen it out a little bit. But I've kind of made some little reference marks here. And that's something that I will occasionally do. It just really depends on the status of where the painting is. I put a little bit of a mark here along the top of the head. I'm just trying to, make little notes, little shorthand notes about what I want to do to this one. And there's a few things that I'm going to change as we go along here. But the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to get a little bit of medium out here just to give myself a little bit of fluidity to my paint. Take a little bit of red. I just want to warm things up. Take a little bit of yellow ochre. And I'm just going to give myself a little bit of a warming up here. And what this does is it creates a surface on the painting that has the same feel to it. Like there's not dry areas and there's not wet areas or oily areas. It's all the same. So this is kind of the way I like to start a new day oftentimes, is just get everything on the surface even and unified. A little bit more medium there. So you just get, this is probably about 50-50 between medium and paint. I'm just trying to, sort of maintain a consistency here. I'm just building it up. I did this a few weeks ago when we worked on another longer term one. And this is just sort of my regular practice. There's not a lot of artists that do this. This is just something that I like to do. This is probably not even necessary. You can probably skip this if you don't like it. I just like to have a surface where everything is kind of unified. All right, so I'm just warming her up. She's from the Mediterranean, so she's used to those warm, sunny days. So I'm just kind of warming things up. All right, so what I'm going to do here now is I'm just going to change like some of these lines that I made down here. I'm just going to take some of this umber and not really using any medium here, just kind of blocking things in. And you'll notice I'm using a really pretty big brush. That is something that I really advocate, is just basically using as big a brush as you feel you can get away with. So I'm using a nice big, this is a size, what is this, size 10. Same brush that I use to kind of block things in. I'll do a little bit of, just sort of block this in as well. It's a little, not being terribly precise, just trying to get things evened out. All right. The other thing that I want to do here is just kind of give her a haircut. I had my haircut this week, so I'm inspired by haircuts. It's going to take a little bit of yellow ochre and just kind of trim a little bit off here. Trying to get that general shape and edge of her head down to the level that makes a little more sense to me, to my eye, and to the original there. That seems a little bit more like it. And then also I'm going to just take this brush with a little bit of that yellow ochre already in it and kind of refine some more of the general shape. And let me see that. Got to get my, nope, that's not it. And remember, if you got any questions, just feel free to ask. There she is. Got to get this up on my screen here. There we go. Okay, so sorry about that. So what I'm doing is I'm just going to go and just get that hairline sorted out. Kind of going back to the beginning again. You always want to be making sure that you're okay with the overall structure of things. And what I mean by that is, if it suddenly looks like, her head is twice as big as her body or something ridiculous like that, you got to make those decisions. The longer you put those decisions off, the harder it's going to be, the more paint you get on here, especially with oils, because oils stay open so long. It just gets really difficult to make changes when you've got 3 or 4 different colors on there, and they just kind of interact with each other and kind of create this mess that is really hard to remedy once you've reached kind of a certain point in the overall workings of it.
We have a question, Mike.
Yeah, let's hear
Alex
it.
says, what should I do if I want to rework the face now that all of it is dry? Should I use titanium white?
It depends upon what you want to do. I mean, if it's stuff where you just need to kind of, like if it's too wide through here and you need to kind of shave it down and do something like that, obviously you would do that with a darker color. But if it's something where you've covered, like if this eye, you felt like it needed to be moved over a little bit, what I tend to do is just bring this back to 0, bring it back to a color like this. And that's going to be probably a mix between some white and some yellow ochre. And I just would go over this area and then redraw it in whatever position I felt that it needed the adjustment. So it depends. But yeah, titanium white mixed with a little bit of yellow to give it sort of that warm glow. Got to remember, I've got wet paint all over the whole thing here. That's a really good, sensible way to start with it for sure. All right. I think that's all the sort of structural. There's some grays over here, and I'm not going to worry too much about those background colors because I want to get right into the features. I feel like the general shape of things is I just move this in so her head is kind of leaning over a little bit more. She's definitely leaning in more than I had it. It was more of a, like her torso was turned a little more towards us, and I've kind of turned her back. And I feel that's a better representation of what Sargent was after. So I'm going to switch brushes. I'm going to get a little smaller here. Let me get things a little closer because I'm kind of ready to hone in on the picture. And I'm gonna mix up a Capri earth flesh tone. This is oftentimes when it comes to portraits can be a little problematic for people. It's like, what do I use? What colors do I use? I always start, especially with sort of Caucasian flesh. I start with the two warm colors, sort of a red and a yellow. In this particular case, the yellow is not going to be this yellow down here. It's not going to be this bright yellow. It's not going to be predominantly that color. It's probably going to be more this yellow ochre. And that's definitely something that a Mediterranean flesh tone would have. It's a little bit more earthy. And so I'm just going to go with yellow ochre. And I'm just going to warm it up a little bit with some of this bright red. It's kind of like a cadmium red or a naphthol red or something like that. Just a little bit. She might even have a little bit of brown in her as well. The thing about flesh tones is they're really hard to figure out because they're so subtle and there's so much white in them oftentimes, especially with lighter toned skins, that, you know, people add too much white or not enough white, or you often have that sort of missing color. And it takes a little bit of experimentation. So now I'm gonna keep this as sort of a middle tone and then add the white as kind of my primary color. I got a little bit of dried stuff in there. I'm just going to take a little bit of that. So let's see how that looks. That's not too bad. So it was just a straight red, like a strong, vibrant red, an earthy yellow, a tiny bit of brown, and that was to sort of maybe neutralize some of the brightness of the red, you know, because that red is really strong and it's really a vivid color. So the brown, the earthy brown here, the raw umber, is a nice kind of temper to the brightness and the intensity. I think that's actually going to work pretty well. But one thing that I'm going to do even before I do this, so I've got these colors here. There's actually, in flesh tones, there's a ton of gray. Like if you look in here, you can see some of the gray, but if you even look at the picture up in the corner there, you know, in these sort of in between areas where it's not a highlight, it's not a shadow, it's sort of in between. That's often where you know, colors get a little murky, and it really is hard to kind of figure out what's going on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mix up kind of a gray, and I'm just going to take sort of a little bit of the leftovers I had here. Take some of this brown, maybe take a little bit more white, and maybe throw in some of this black, or a lot of that black, as it turns out. Maybe a little bit more of this in there, and I'm just going to, you know, get a nice kind of middle tone. So I'll pull in a little bit of a different piece of the puzzle.
While you're mixing, we have a question.
Yep.
Can I use linseed oil and terpenoid in a 1-to-1 ratio as a medium if they don't have Liquin?
Yes, you can. Terpenoid is a solvent, so it's, you know, it's like turpentine, but it's not as stinky, which is great. It will thin out the linseed oil and make it almost like water. So I would use it somewhat sparingly. You can also use straight linseed oil too, if you don't like to if you don't, you know, want to lose that kind of stickiness of the oil. You can just use it straight. So I'm going to throw a little bit of blue in this too. I'm not quite getting to the gray area that I want. So yes, the answer to the question is yes, but it really is a kind of a personal preference as to how fluid or sticky you want your paint to ultimately be. All right, so what I'm going to do with this gray, I think I've got it now. So this has been I've just sort of pulled from a lot of different places. It's kind of it's got a little bit of a greenish tint to it. So I'm gonna go with this. I'm gonna see how it works. And what I'm gonna use is I'm just gonna scrub it in with a little round brush here. And I'm not going to use any medium to start with. Let's see how I need it. I've actually already got some gray in here from the previous layers, but this is something that artists would do, you know, back in the Renaissance and the Baroque era, back in the 1600s. They would do a layer called a grisaille, which just simply translates into gray layer. And it was really important for tonal paintings. And what I'm doing with this is I'm just kind of scrubbing it in everywhere. And this may seem slightly odd and counterintuitive, but what it does is it gives all of the skin kind of a middle tone. And what I can do is I can work off of this. I can go lighter and warmer, and I can go darker and cooler. I can go in different directions as long as I don't cover this up. You don't want to use a lot of gray so that, you know, if I couldn't see the eye after after I did this, it would be way, way too dark. So I'm just trying to be sort of somewhat blendy with it, for lack of a better word. And I don't even know if that's a word. I don't even think it is. Somebody can look that up and let us know. I'm pretty sure it's not. But for our purposes, it is a word.
Oh, sorry
Yes.
to interrupt. At this point, do you think it would be a little too late to change the tilt of the head?
That's probably something that I would do if I had more time. I would not try and do it now. It's just, that's a separate problem altogether. But I hear where you're coming from, and it's something that I would do under normal circumstances, but we're not really there with our time frame. So I wouldn't do it. But you can do it. I mean, hopefully what I'm doing is I'm giving you enough information. And one of the things that I really want to stress is you should be able to fix any problem that you see at any point in the painting process based on kind of how I'm working. I'm doing a lot of back and forth, and that's what I wanted to show you with that sort of staged painting where I did, you know, step 1, step 2, and then step 3. And then this one is to let you know that it's a very fluid situation, and you can make adjustments pretty much anytime you want. And it just requires a little bit more confidence. Another thing that I'm noticing here is I've got too much skin exposed here. This line probably needs to be pulled in. So I'm just gonna make that adjustment here in very rough terms by not putting that gray in here. But anywhere where there's skin, I'm just putting a little bit of gray, and I'm gonna go back and just use that gray as kind of a mid-tone to work with. And once I've got that gray in there, what I like to do is I'm just cleaning the brush that I just used, taking a little bit of medium and getting off the most egregious gray that I can. I'm not totally cleaning the brush. I'm just wiping off the majority of that gray. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go back to a darker tone. I'm going to take some umber. I'm going to take some blue. And all I'm going to do with this is I'm going to reiterate the darks. So because I've kind of lost some of the extreme darks, but I've also gained a lot of middle tones by adding this gray. So it's just a little bit of a trade-off. And now I'm just going to go back and address the darker areas at the moment. So it's a little bit of blue, a little bit of black, and a little bit of umber. And that's kind of a nice, and the blue can be really any primary dark color, cobalt blue, even cerulean blue. I think this is actually like a cerulean blue hue. Prussian blue, although be careful with those phthalos and those Prussian blues because they can get a little intense. So I'm just going to take this and I'm just going to go in and kind of redo. I've got no medium on here. I'm just using straight paint because there's already a lot of medium on here. And so I like to integrate that. And what I'm trying to do is just sort of see where I can use that gray that I've already put down. This is a pretty dark area altogether. So I'm going to try and use a little bit of that. And it's ultimately, it's just kind of darkening things up, but also integrating a lot of that gray in there and giving me at the end just kind of a nice range of middle tones, you know, not super dark, not super light, just a nice just a little bit more variety. All right, so I'm just going to keep going and let's see where else we got some really darks. And then I want to use these, that, pull some of that out. Maybe a little bit under here. Just looking for anything that needs to be amplified. Under the nose for sure is pretty dark. And this brush is getting to the point where I might need to go a little smaller, and that's something I want to show you today. I got these sort of new quality of brushes that I like to break out in, you know, the stages where we're getting a little bit more serious. Oh, I just gave her a little mustache. That. All right, going to the ear here. I didn't really address the ear too much. The ear is another thing that's got a pretty peculiar structure to it, and I'm not really devoting a lot of time to it because I guess I could do a demo later on painting ears, but that's not this demo. Yeah, see this whole ear is just not quite drawn right. And I'm going to try and a little bit of there. That's a little better, but not much. All right, the eye. Let's take a look at the eye. So with eyes, you have the real central part of the eye, the iris, and then you have the sort of the other area around that, which is a little bit, generally speaking, a little bit lighter. So I'm going to make that differentiation here. You can't really see it in the picture over here, but it's there. If you've looked at this with any kind of detail-oriented eye, you'll notice that there's lots of real subtle stuff that I wasn't able to get to. And I'm also going to sort of deal with this. Oh, I need to get my glass on. All right, so I'm going to shift to a brush here that's smaller. And this is the brushes that I wanted to show you about or talk to you about. So let's just see here. This is a nice kind of upper range Artist Loft brush, and it's called Vienna, and they're sable, so they're really fine, and they've got a really nice point that they come to, so you can get some really nice scripty details. This brush I think is like $4 or $5 a piece, maybe $3.50, something like that. So it's not terribly expensive, but when you compare it to these, which are like, you know, you get 20 of them for $10 or something like that, they're much better quality. They'll last longer. The point will stay pointy longer. So they're really nice for this kind of more detailed look. The other thing that I want to show you is I've got here my little bridge. This is just some scrap wood that I had lying down, some little things like this, and I've got it on both ends. It goes like this, so it's bigger than my painting, and I'm just going to kind of lay it over an area where I like to work. So it's not, I'm not leaning my arm right in the paint, and I'm going to get in there and do a little bit more of a fine line. And these little script, they're like almost like script pens, and they're awesome. I love them. And they're really necessary when you're doing stuff like this, which is a little bit more in the weeds, so to speak. So I'm just putting in little dark touches. Let's get the sharpness better. There we go. So there we go. I won't talk as I'm concentrating What else we got here? So it's really, I'm really kind of defining a lot of the stuff that the details and the anatomy that I alluded to, and now I'm really kind of trying to make it a little bit more apparent. That's completely wrong, but that's better than it was. As tempting as it is to get in here and fuss over the ear, I'm going to try and avoid it. All right, what else we got? There's a little bit, so I'm just going to take off a little bit of paint here and just get less, but it's still the dark. And just kind of come in here and pop out slightly darker, a little bit more paint. She's had a long night, apparently. She looks a little tired. And let's see, anything else that I missed? This bit of the eye is a little tricky. Got a little bit too heavy on the eyebrows there, I think. Or eyelids, I should say. Speaking of eyebrows, let's do that. Get some nice strong darks up here. Just add those in and maybe give myself a little bit more brown. Generally, as you get into the light more, the colors are going to get warmer. So brown is a warmer color than this dark bluish brown. So I'm trying to kind of warm that color up a little bit as I'm working through it here. Okay. All right, that seems pretty good. What else we got here? Some more of that. Got to get this line of the mouth. Let me do it like this so you can see it better. It's a little slight curl here. All right. Okay. It gets a little darker there, just using a little bit less pressure so it's not quite as dark as some of these stronger lines that I put in here. It's, you know, just sort of a little bit of a finesse thing at this stage. Okay, so I feel like the values are pretty good. There's a little bit of dark here. Maybe I'll just add that in. I'm going to try and add a little bit of structure here to this. Use a little bit more of a dark. Let's see. You can see I'm doing a little bit of modification of where certain things start and where certain things end. So you can make adjustments as you're moving along here. So I'm not entirely in a kind of a color it in type of stage. I'm still looking at adjustments that I can make. All right, I think I'm going to go with that. And I am going to start laying in some of that flesh tone that I started. I'm just going to clean off a bit here.
While you're doing a little bit of cleaning,
Yep.
We have a question about what medium is fast drying, but does not make the painting look dull afterwards.
Well, Liquin probably fits that bill. I mean, there are certain mediums that you can get that are specifically gloss medium, satin medium, and more of a matte medium. So I would look for that. I just use Liquin, but there's lots of them out there that have a little bit more variety. And you know, just sort of hunt and peck and see what's out there. Liquin has never, to me, been an overtly dull medium. So if you're finding that you're getting a lot of dullness, if you're using mineral spirits is the one thing that will probably make your paintings duller than anything else, with maybe the exception of like some sort of wax medium. So, you know, watch out for the amount of mineral spirits that you use. The other thing to think about too is, I'm just taking this flesh tone now, I'm going to start laying it in. As you're moving along, and some areas might be a little bit matte, and some might be really high intensity, bright and shiny. If you find that's the case, at the end, you can always varnish the painting. And varnish is just a simple coat, like I did with that initial lay-in of the yellow ochre. That's when you can really kind of make the gloss of the painting appear more uniform. So I hope that answered your question. I think give you a little bit to go with there. So what I'm doing here now is I'm really just trying to find, let me get some detail. Close in, extreme close up. There we go. I'm just trying to lay in flesh tones, but I'm not, I'm not decorating a cake here. I'm not trying to make it all even. I'm really looking for some spots that are really strongly bright. This is a really bright flesh tone. I could probably get away with mixing kind of like maybe taking this, oh, you can't see it, but adding a little bit more pigment that's not white. So remember that mid-tone that I had that was sort of that brown. So I'm just going to kind of go around here and just try and, feather it into the little transition areas. So this has got a little more brown in it, a little less white, but it's still a pretty bright color all the way around. Let's try this. And one thing that I notice about this picture is her skin gets darker as you go from the top down. So I am slowly, incrementally adding a little bit more of the brown as I'm working my way through it. And I actually like this a lot better than that bright one that I started with. So yeah, there we go. And working fairly thinly still. You don't want to go too thick until you're, right in the end stages here. Just working it into this gray a little bit, sort of making these transitions a little bit more subtle. And I'm just using this brush because I kind of like the softness of it, and I really want, I really want that transition to be smooth. So a nice softer brush. I'm just pulling a little bit more of this brown up here because I like how it's working down below, and I kind of want to get a little bit of integration there between different areas of the paint. All right, we're getting down to the end, so I'm going to just sort of pick up the pace. There we go. Let's see, there's a little bit of brown. So I'm gonna keep these gray areas open because they're doing a nice job of kind of filling in a little bit of those transitional areas where it goes from a more dark area to a warmer area. These grays are sort of a nice in between, and that's a really important part of portraiture in terms of turning it around in space, giving it that sense of dimension. Let's do a little repair on the problematic ear that's been neglected. Let's see here, sort of a warmer. It's starting to look pretty good. This brown is going to get redder in here. I'm going to go in here with the nose. So, and you also notice, hopefully you can see little spots where that yellow is popping through. You know, the viewer's eye, the person who's looking at it, has a very capable ability to blend colors together without them being perfectly done so on the paper or on the canvas or whatever you're painting on. So, you know, don't feel like you need to cover every square inch of every painting that you do. Let those different layers, and we are essentially working in different layers here. Let those different layers work for you, and don't feel the need to kind of come in and do a lot of sort of heavy lifting in terms of how much paint you've got on there. More paint is oftentimes the enemy of your painting. So, you know, use as much as you need to get to where you want to go. If you see it getting a little bit too thick and things are getting covered up, then you've probably gone a little bit too far. All right, so what I'm looking for now is oftentimes in these darker areas, you'll see kind of a burst of warmth. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this flesh tone. Let me widen this out again here so you can see what I'm talking about. So the color that I've been using a lot of, it's still not quite right. There we go. Is this flesh tone here. And I'm just going to warm that up. So this has the effect of making it a little bit darker, but it's definitely warmer. And there's a lot of that throughout here. So I'm going to be really kind of modest with it. I'm just trying to warm up. Let's get back in a little bit more so you can see what I'm doing. So you know what colors I'm using now. I'm just gonna try and warm up some of these shadow areas a little bit. Under here. And this just this has the effect of basically, you know, pumping blood into them, you know, livening them up. I mean, these, oh, I forgot to do the eyelids. Let's do a little bit of that. You know, before they would often call the gray layer the dead layer because everything was gray and there wasn't much life to it. And when you start adding these warmer colors, it really, you know, it's like bringing somebody back from the dead. So thus the name. I'm just kind of warming things up, but ever so softly and ever so gently, and with a fair amount of integration into the colors I've already put there. And one thing about these kind of warmer passages is they have a tendency of being more prominent, like, for lack of a better word, a brighter red, where the bone is closest to the skin. So that's going to be in the nose, the bridge of the nose, in the cheekbone, where the cheekbone is. Any area that's got bone right close to the surface is a real important one for understanding how, you know, on how and where to add more fleshy tones to the painting. All right, what else we got here? Got a little bit more red down here. And you can see I kind of, I maybe started with a little spot of red and then just kind of work it in a little bit. And then in here, there's going to be some, we'll make this one a little bit darker. So I'm taking some raw umber. Let's pan you over here. I'm taking some raw umber down here and mixing it with a little bit of this red. So it's kind of a darker red. So something like right in here. I'm just kind of warming it up a little bit. It's all going to be this ear. And the jawbone oftentimes will have a little bit of more warmth to it. Getting there. You never want to lose sight of those planes of the face. If you're going along and things are starting to look kind of flat, it generally means that you don't have the value transitions right, the dark to light kind of effect. So all I'm doing right now is I'm just kind of warming up the darks a little bit, losing a little bit of the values. So I'm going to maybe make it a little darker. So more brown, less red, maybe even some blue. This whole area can get a little bit warmer and darker. And the whites of the eyes are rarely white. They're more gray, and especially something like this where the vast majority of that area is in shadow. You get a little bit of that happening. Anybody got any questions as we're sort of rounding things out here towards the end? Feel free to put them in the chat. All right, I'm gonna, because I have to, I'm gonna kind of go to the middle here, or go to the end. I'm gonna use this nice Vienna, one of these nicer quality ones. This is a small filbert, it's a size 4, and I'm gonna go in with strongest highlights. That strong white. And bridge of the nose, always a good one. And this is oftentimes, let me just get us a little closer over here.
What was the size of the brush you were using previously before this one?
Yeah, this one here, this was an 8 round. This is a 4 filbert. But really, I mean, it should be whatever you're comfortable with. And like I said, I see people use the wrong size brushes so often. It's just, you know, whatever you feel like you need to get into these spaces is what you should be using. It's really a comfort level. Some people like to use bigger brushes. Some people like to use smaller brushes. Just use what you need to. And now I'm just trying to go back and unify this a little bit more. A little. And this paint, these layers here are oftentimes the heaviest. Like there's some actual texture to the paint. Rembrandt, one of the great artists of the Baroque era, Dutch painter, he would mix his whites like this with broken glass, with just little shards of glass, and it would just add some body to the paint, and it would also give it some luminosity that, you know, I mean, glass sort of refracts and reflects light. So the light would hit the painting and it would just kind of burst with light. I'm not recommending you do that, but I'm just telling you the extremes that certain artists have done to get desired effects. There we go. The gloss of this, it's a little too glossy. There's a nice little highlight there. Nice little highlight, and you know, sometimes at the very end, I'll just add like a nice gob, a little dollop of paint as a final touch. And what happens is it dries and it's got these little points on it, the paint does, and that just allows the light to do more interesting things. sort of picking up these last bits of highlights. Yeah, it's starting to look a little better. Oh, and I totally forgot about the down low. So let's finish up with that. Got a few minutes left. I'm going to take some of this flesh tone up here. Let's kind of block this in with my little Filbert brush. Filberts are good because you can get kind of tight in here, but you can also flatten them out a little bit. And there's kind of a nice secondary warm little bit underneath there. Kind of going a little bit overboard, but oh well. When you got 4 minutes left. All right, let me do one last thing and then we'll call it good. Maybe have a few folks show their work. So I'm just going to use some white, a little bit of gray, and just kind of block in some of this. So this gray, a little bit of white. Just trying to get a little bit of the contrast along the edge here. And this is it's nice to have a little bit of kind of textural contrast here. And what I mean by that is the skin is usually fairly, smooth, generally speaking, with sometimes occasional textured highlights. But for the most part, it's fairly smooth. And then to have kind of a rougher edge along there is kind of a nice way to add some contrast there. So I'm gonna do this. I wanted to clean that up a little bit. All right, home stretch. Not bad. Sargent doesn't have anything to worry about in terms of his legacy with this copy, but hopefully gives you an idea of how to approach a really complicated subject like portraiture. Okay, I could go on, but I will leave it there. And let's see if we've got a few people that would like to show their work. Let me just get rid of some of this stuff here. Where is it?
All right, I'm going to go ahead and spotlight some work then.
Yeah, let's have a look. Ooh, very nice. Matt L. Or yes, Matt L. Very nice. But the painter is over there. You're not a Matt, but that's a nice painting. Excellently done. Very good. All right, Sarah, very nice. That looks like your own portrait of somebody, somebody in your house, maybe. I don't know. That looks awesome. Ooh, is that a drawing? Just went with the drawing, that one. Yeah, very nice, Patty. Ooh, Henrietta, very nice. Very nice kind of transitions in the skin tones there. Nice little round. Okay. Yeah, that's a nice one. I can't read the name. Lilacobel at AOL.com. I'll just go with that. I know it's wrong, but my apologies. All right. Let's see who else we got. Oh, and John is doing his portrait, his double portrait there. Very nice. I like the little pop of red in there with the rest of the kind of the more muted colors. Great. That looks great. All right, Carol. Very nice. Oh, I forgot to put the red headband in. Oh, well. Thanks for reminding me. Excellent. Excellent job. Yeah, just keep popping out those contrasts of light and dark. Good, Cindy. Excellent. Those warm tones in the background really pop out the skin too. That's a nice little touch. Another thing that I didn't get to. Well done. Anybody else?
Let's see.
We're right up against it, but we're doing our best. Michelle, looks like Michelle M has got her hand up. Heidi. Very nice. I have to turn my head sideways to look at it. Very good. Yeah, the value differences are really good. That really nice dark under the chin is excellent. Nicely done. Anna. Oh yeah, very good. Yeah, again, that nice dark shadow. Warm, maybe that shadow under the neck gets a little warm with a little bit of red. And you can just sort of integrate that right in there. That will really pop it out. Give it sort of that secondary highlight to it. Awesome. The drawing on that is really nice. Michelle, yeah, oh yeah, very good. Yeah, get some of those shadows in that cheekbone, and that's going to look awesome. Very nice. Good, 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 good.
Right, I think that was most people who had.
Yeah, sorry if we didn't get to it. Maybe next week you can just hold it up while we're working so we can see it. But that was an excellent job, and thank you all for sticking with this two-parter. We're going to do, actually next week, we're going to do another two-parter. And the concentration I'm going to try and get to is getting into sort of more detailed work, like, sort of highlights on flower. It's going to be a still life, so it'll be, I haven't quite figured out what I'm going to do yet, but it'll be some fruits and, maybe some flowers or whatever. Just try to have a lot of different textures that we can play around with and really get into some details with maybe some of those smaller brushes. That'll be more towards the second session, which will be, I believe, the 28th. So the 21st and the 28th are going to be a two-parter, and it will be still life. So I hope to see you next week, and excellent job. And thank you all for sticking with it. And we will see you next week, hopefully. Take care. Bye-bye.